depression is a very healthy response to inadequacy. Depression most of the time is not real.
Now, today we have a clip from a very viral video on the Jubilee channel. It was called Fat versus Fit Men. Now, it had a very controversial figure on it named Myron. He's from the popular podcast, the Fresh and Fit podcast. I actually watched this show, and I love making videos about it or talking about it in general because it really makes you think. And despite what you may think they believe, it brings out a lot of different social issues that we can see in the real world. But with that being said, in the Jubilee video, it was men that came from the obese side, people who were plus size, overweight, and then men that were fit from just general lean athletic to all the way to supersized bodybuilder and everything in between. So this was a pretty interesting debate because they all have different perspectives in their respective side of the argument. But given Myron's claims, how does this come back to what I talk about with the mental? So at the end of the hour plus long video, someone mentioned that they dealt with a lot of depression because they were overweight. And they said this was a big contributor. Now, not the only one. Obviously, there's other parts of life, but I can understand how being overweight, obese can make you depressed. But the backlash came because Myron said that being fat made him depressed and it's your own fault. And also, he also said depression isn't real. So these are things I want to talk about because obviously, if we're talking about on here, I'm going to come from that psychological, that applied aspect of how this makes sense in real time. So with that being said, let's break this down. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about what depression is. Now, we can look at it as simply from the clinical psychological aspect, when there's 9 different criteria that we would look for. You need to meet at least 5 of them. But that's not where I want to go necessarily for major depressive disorder. That's not where I want to go with this. I want to talk more so the act of feeling depressed based on your actual feelings and emotions rather than the clinical diagnosis. So we look at depression from that standpoint. It's probably a lower mood, a deep sadness, things that hinder your day-to-day to some degree, make you feel less than adequate. And we all go through some level of this. So the reason that isn't clinical because there is a higher level of it. Everyone deals with depression to some degree, but it's not high enough to be diagnosed, but we do feel it. So going to the point of knowing what that is, it is a real thing. But I think when Myron says it isn't real, what he's trying to say is the symptoms that comes with it sometimes are perceived. And I don't want to put words in his mouth and assume. He could have a different meaning why he said that, but I'm going to assume from what I take from it myself that it's the perception he's saying that isn't real. And I kind of agree with that because when you think about it, a lot of our anxieties, our worries, our stressors aren't imminent danger. Because if you look at an evolutionary approach to depression, we had times when we were in tribes in ancient times where it was about 100 so people. And when you felt depression, you would kind of distance yourself, kind of lower your mood and try to reflect. And the reflection gave you time to think of ideas on how to get out of this rut. And eventually you come back, you reintegrate to the tribe and you get back to where you were. But sadly, in the modern times, I always say there's no more saber-toothed tigers. You have no reason to really have to do this. You can order everything to your house through Amazon, Uber Eats. So realistically speaking, you don't have to actually solve any actual problems to survive and get back to the group and keep going as business as usual. So this could add to the fact that when someone gets obese, this goes hand in hand because all your physical needs are met, your safety needs are met, your food needs are met for the most part. So you don't have to do anything to get better. And this is one of his points that he makes is when you're less than adequate, and he uses more so as a man, and that's a lot of things they talk about in their podcast, is you lose that drive. And I do agree with that too, because as humans, we have this will to meaning. Look at Viktor Frankl. This is one of his big topics. And I believe a lot from that existential point of view, because when you lose that meaning and purpose, it's like, why do I need to even try and keep going? You even look at like active aging communities with the elderly. Usually when they lose a purpose, their family doesn't really come to visit them, or they don't have the same responsibilities to get put in a home. They don't live too much longer after that. Usually die within years because why keep going? So going back to the point of if you're obese, this is more about the aesthetic side and the health side, but from the mental side, you can see how useful are you to society when people usually look down and shun people who are overweight. So this is one thing I think that turns into a more emotionally charged debate, when in actuality, I think it was coming more from that you need to solve the problem, figure it out, and do better so you can get back to where you were. And I agree with that side of it for sure. Another topic or claim they said during the video is one of the people rebutted the one who made the initial claim about depression, obesity. He said people die from depression all the time. And this is where I think that balance of that line gets crossed of mental health issues veering into end all be all, because you don't actually die from depression. Depression may manifest mentally, but anything that comes after that from, say, self-harm, That's 100% from the person themselves. Now, this does not discount the battle that they're dealing with. I'm not doing that because that is an issue, but it still has to come from the person's choice. And it goes back to that perception. I have at least 5 or 6 people I know personally, like direct acquaintances, some even good friends that are no longer here anymore because they took their own lives. And even though they had to be going through the worst part of their life to get to the point where they don't want to exist anymore, they made a choice. And sometimes once we realize that it isn't what we think it is, or it's not as bad as we think it is, we can come through it. But sometimes we need that guidance, that push, that help. That could be therapy, that could be the family, that could be getting in shape, that could be getting a better job. These things can shift and immediately change our disposition, our perception of what we're doing and where we're at. But unfortunately, that doesn't always come in a timely manner, and some people just can't take it anymore. But to say that people just outright died directly from it, that's a misconception, or they just worded it wrong. I get what he was trying to say, but that's why we can't just extreme and radicalize these mental health issues, because there is a medium, there is a spectrum of how these things partake. Now, all in all, this topic, fat versus fit, it went a lot of different ways. And I think it's a good conversation because when we talk about men's mental health, I don't think the physical aesthetic is talked about a lot, because a lot of times we talk about, say, women, how there's a lot of high standards for body image, like bigger butts and all that thing that's become a thing now. Because I remember I'm 35, I was younger. It used to be an insult to have a big butt. Now it's an insult to say you have a small butt. So it's just weird how these standards change, but it brings some light to men's body image, because sadly, there's a lot of factors about men's body image that can't be changed, like height, for example. But weight definitely can be. But we never talk about how, and I agree with Myron with this, when we talked about men's duty, how that burden, let's just talk about aesthetically first, is a lot higher, because getting six-pack abs and big muscles takes a lot more work. Typically, going back to the standard, the male gaze, usually the standards that women are held to are more achievable. They don't require as much, more so, dedication to a gym rather than just staying leaner or not as obese, which is still a challenge to some, but it's not the same. I'm just going to put it like that. But this is the point where this shines a bright light on how men get also put in this box on how they should look. And that is pressure. I can see how that guy, I've dealt with it myself, and I'm not obese, but I have gained weight and got bigger than I used to be. I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been a bodybuilder. I've been to the extreme limits of my human performance. So this really brought up a lot of attention. I actually like this discussion. I think it's one of the most popular videos of all time. Has a lot of comments, a lot of back and forth. But that mental health conversation, I'm glad it came up. Now, like I said, Myron's word choice, I don't like to be the police of words and people say, oh, it's how you say it. Because, hey, your expression is your expression. So I'm not mad at how he said it. That's fine. It's just that I think more people need to understand the context and how things go about when we talk about depression as a whole. So let me know what you guys think. I'll put the actual link to the full video in the description. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about depression, men's mental health all as a whole. And as always, guys, get your mind right.